Vladimir Putin has announced that he is suspending Russia's participation in what is referred to as the START treaty, a treaty that he entered with the United States, which limits the nuclear capability of both countries. So we're doing great, lots of progress when it comes to geopolitics. He says, quote, I am forced to announce, are you forced? I'm forced to announce today that Russia is suspending its participation in the Strategic Offensive Arms Treaty. Putin told lawmakers toward the end of a major speech to parliament nearly 1 year into his invasion into Ukraine. Now, what exactly is the START treaty and what did it do? Well, the START treaty was originally signed back in 2010 in Prague specifically, and then they decided to extend it during Biden's administration in 2021. Of course, this is prior to Russia's invasion into Ukraine. It caps the number of strategic nuclear warheads that the United States and Russia can deploy. Although if you deploy any, we're already in bad shape. So look, honestly, just reading what the START treaty does, I don't really think this is that big of a deal. However, I'm uncomfortable with how often Vladimir Putin brings up the topic of nuclear weapons in various ways as this war continues.
Yeah, so look, there's two ways to interpret that. One is he's saber rattling, and it's a good halfway measure where he's threatening us without actually doing anything. If that interpretation proves to be correct, great. Then take all the quarter measures, half measures that you want, as long as you don't actually launch anything, right? And I think the Chinese agree with me. We'll get to that in a minute. But of course, other possibility is he's doing exactly what he did at the border, where he piled up the troops and said, I'm gonna come in, and unless you give me X. And then they gave him X, and he's like, well, I'm just kidding, I was gonna come in anyway, right? And so, and in this case, he could be saying, yeah, I'm gonna deploy more nuclear missiles. And by the way, deploy just could mean that, hey, I've got more subs with nukes that I was supposed to have under the treaty in the water now. I've got more missiles ready to go now. Using them is a different thing, but it could be a prelude to using them. So this is, look, I've said this many times. We keep assuming that Putin won't do it when he's shown on a great number of occasions when we think he won't do something, he does actually do it. So
Vladimir Putin has the largest stockpile of nuclear weapons of any country. I didn't know that. I thought that the United States and Russia was either equal in the number of nuclear weapons, or honestly, I thought the US probably had more. But Russia currently has 6,000 warheads.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter if they had 600.
Why do you need 6,000? Why do you need 6,000? Like, one will do the destruction, right? Yeah. Like, it's amazing.
Yeah, because we got into this really, really dumb
arms race.
Yeah. And this treaties like this were supposed to cool down the arms race, and now Putin's saying no. And by the way, for the Russians, probably half of them don't work, but they don't need it anyway. I mean, 600 could probably wipe out humanity, let alone 6,000.
Correct.
So the minute you start launching them, it's an epic disaster we can't recover from. Again, I think the Chinese are our best friends in this case, even though we're demagoguing against them. Can I just read that quote? Okay, Xi and Biden talked, and Xi has said this, and the Chinese diplomats have said this on a number of occasions, but the quote is important. Nuclear weapons cannot be used and nuclear wars must not be fought, the Chinese leader said. So they're now beginning to side with Russia. We're really mad about it. We're saying their Chinese are helping the Russians with lethal aid. But here's the Chinese saying basically, look, the rule we're laying down for the Russians is maybe we help you, maybe we stay neutral, maybe we even give you some arms, but you cannot do nuclear strikes. If you do, then we're out. And they're saying that very publicly.
Yeah, and let me be clear about something. As far as I've read, maybe you came across some information that I missed, but I have not seen any indication that China is willing to provide lethal weapons to Russia. Now,
yeah, this is what the Americans are saying.
Right, the US State Department is accusing Russia of that. They claim, and Anthony Blinken specifically claims that they have information indicating that China is considering providing lethal weapons to Russia, but we haven't really seen any real evidence of that. And China certainly has not in any way overtly committed to providing weapons to Russia. But beside that, look, the fact of the matter is China is straddling both sides because they want to improve their relationship with the West in certain regards, especially with Germany and France. But they are also purchasing pretty cheap oil from Russia at the same time. So there is a benefit in straddling both sides, right?
Yeah, and the extra benefit that people aren't talking about that I'm alluding to here is if China serves as a check on Putin, saying, hey, here's a line you cannot cross, otherwise you'll have no allies left. That could actually be super helpful to the rest of the world. So that's why us like blowing down China's doors with all of our, warmongering talk against them is not at all helpful.
I agree with you on that wholeheartedly. So I want to give you a few other excerpts from Putin's speech. He says that he is suspending the treaty, but it doesn't mean that he's pulling out of the treaty. He says, of course, we will not be the first to carry out nuclear tests, but if the United States tests, then we will. No one must be under any dangerous illusions that global strategic parity can be destroyed. He also says Western elites aren't trying to conceal their goals to inflict a strategic defeat to Russia. They intend to transform the local conflict into a global confrontation. And he is definitely telling the truth about that, because here is Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin in April of 2022 making it abundantly clear that they want to essentially use this conflict to weaken Russia to the best of the United States' abilities. Let's watch.
We want to see Russia weakened to the degree that it can't do the kinds of things that it has done in invading Ukraine. So it has already lost a lot of military capability and a lot of its troops, quite frankly. And we want to see them not have the capability to very quickly reproduce that capability.
So, statements like that make it clear to everybody, including Vladimir Putin and Russia, that we are looking for them to basically deplete what is left of their military capability. And we brought this up when we covered the story yesterday, and I think it's an important point to touch on, because when it comes to what the United States is urging in this conflict, is there some messaging in regard to avoiding peace negotiations or a peace deal? I'm concerned about that. And as that is being discouraged, Russia, with an irrational actor like Vladimir Putin, is getting more and more belligerent in regard to his comments on nuclear war.
Yeah, so I want to break down the last quote from Putin that Anna read you, because it's about a third right. Are we trying to weaken Russia through this conflict? Yes, absolutely correct. Okay, and you just saw it; it's not in dispute, right? But do we want a global confrontation? No, we want to drive up defense contractor contracts to as much as humanly possible, dump it on the American taxpayer. We want oil prices to be high. We want speculation in the financial industry to be high, etc. We're just trying to make as much money as possible for our elites. That's the only goal of our government.
That's not the only goal. I don't think that's the only goal. I think the other goal is to weaken Russia militarily to ensure that China really doesn't have another superpower to align with should we continue antagonizing them.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, our goal is financial. I don't think, we gain, all of the elites in our country gain by picking on a smaller country like Iraq and destroying it for profit, right? But if you go up against Russia, nobody's gonna gain from New York getting nuked, okay? So, but we're playing a super dangerous game of confrontation that could accidentally lead to that. But there's one other part of that statement. He says they want to inflict, Putin said, a strategic defeat to Russia. Well, you know how you could have prevented that, Vlad, by not invading Ukraine.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, nobody forced a strategic defeat on you. You made that decision, and apparently, not so bright, you had no idea what your military's capability was. I mean, you got humiliated there, and now you're trying to save face. That's why the Chinese being allies with the Russians, I'm telling you, is not such a bad thing, because if the Chinese go screw it, we're not allies with you either, then he's fully backed into a corner and thinks I got nothing left to lose. And that's a really bad place for Putin to be.
So we'll see what happens in the future. Obviously, I think the best path forward is to encourage pressure both sides to engage in a peace deal. We're nowhere near that right now, and things continue to escalate, and that's what's concerning about it. So we'll stay on the story and let you guys know updates as we learn about them.
Here at TYT, we work to cut through all the establishment media's biases and bring you the news from a factual and progressive viewpoint. Now allow me to introduce you to Ground News, a new tool that you can use to stay informed on what's really going on around the world. Ground News doesn't just bring you the information, it also provides you with an easy to use rating system that measures each article's political leanings, factuality, and gives you complete transparency on who owns the news that you're reading. Like today, I was on their site and I saw an article about some improvements in the ozone layer. And I was a little skeptical because good news about the climate is pretty rare these days. But with over 100 sources originating from an even spread of news organizations, I was confident that what I was reading was true. So score one for Earth. So get the whole picture and break through the corporate media agenda by subscribing to Ground News today.